First, I'll see where you're located right now. So my name is Casey. I work for Trusted Health. I'm a nurse. Thank you so much for joining us today for Travel Nurse Housing Do's and Don'ts. I'm actually one of the speakers today. Normally, I'm just one of the MCs. So it's super fun for me to be able to talk about something I'm passionate about. And with this, we have Brian, and we'll kind of introduce ourselves a little bit further down the road. For those who are not familiar with Trusted Health, we are the place for the modern nurse. We place nurses in all 50 states and travel assignments. We also have a ton of resources across. Our blog is fantastic, and we host these virtual events specifically for nurses, so they're a lot of fun. All right, let's see if I can progress to the next slide. All right, perfect. So thank you for joining us. I've already kind of mentioned this, but please ask and upvote questions to the chat and the Q&A function. You're more than welcome to correspond with us through the actual chat, but you'll see the Q&A. It's up in the middle of at the top of the chat. And if you want to click in there, you're going to see where you can ask questions. You can actually upvote questions too. So if you see someone else ask a question that you really want answered, please click, I think it's a thumbs up or something like that, so we know that other people are interested in that question too. We're here to listen, learn, and connect so that you can learn how to handle travel nurse housing like a pro. So we're going to talk about how to find housing options. That's the biggest question for a lot of folks. We're going to talk about online housing scams, what they look like, how to avoid those, safety considerations. Personally, as a young female who traveled a lot by herself, like that's something that's really important to me. And I know to Furnish Finders as a company as well. And then we'll talk about securing a rental and like what that looks like and what questions you need to ask your landlord. So for me, I am a community lead at Trusted Health. I actually manage our community ambassador program now. I used to manage our social, so it's a far cry from the bedside days, but it's a lot of fun, and I really love Trusted as a company. I was a pediatric ER nurse for 6 years. I was all over the U.S., primarily on the West Coast, and I loved it. But travel nursing, I tell people sometimes that I peaked too early. Like I peaked while I was a travel nurse. It was the best 3 years of my life. I did some of it with some of my best friends, and I absolutely loved it. Currently now in Austin, Texas. I fell in love with Austin when I was traveling and ended up staying here. And then a random fun fact for me is that during my Seattle assignment, I randomly rented a room out of a house through this company called Bungalow. And I had 7 random roommates, which sounds like it could be a nightmare, but that was one of my absolute favorite assignments. Like we had a ball, it was all young professionals and everyone was down to hike and do fun things. And I'm still best friends with some of those folks still today. So lots of great experiences. Housing can be tough, but I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. And I'm also really excited to introduce you to our other speaker.
All right, so I'm hoping you can hear me, right?
Yep, sounds great.
Perfect. Really happy to be here. And so my name is Brian Payne. I'm a co-founder here at Furnish Finder. And for those of you who don't know, Furnish Finder is a housing source for travel nurses. So we understand who travel nurses are, and we built our housing platform around you guys. You know, I was in healthcare myself. I had access to a lot of travel nurses. So I would at that time, I was renting to them as landlords as well. So it was just a kind of a match made in heaven. And it's a wonderful site. I'd encourage you to take a look at it whether you're shopping or whether you really desperately need housing in a week or two. We have something for everybody. So we started in 2014. We've grown. We've got about a team of about 50 people who are dedicated working here for you. Landlords list on our site in order to connect with you. So when you think about Furnish Finder, think no booking fees, and you go direct to the landlord. So I'm a Californian. I currently live in Colorado, which we love, past 5 years here. And and it's a family-run business. My wife and I started this company again back in 2014, and it's just been a pleasure to serve this community.
That's awesome. Remind me, Brian, is your wife related to healthcare somehow, or am I making that up?
No, she's not related to healthcare.
Okay, awesome. That's really fun that it's a family business.
Yeah, It's a great site. I mean, we're going to dig into a lot of different aspects, things that you guys need to think about. I mean, it looks like the first one is, you know, your budget. Well, Casey, do you want to go through a few of these?
Yeah, absolutely. So Brian and I are going to tag team this. I'm really excited that I have him with us because I think that I can provide you the perspective from the travel nurse, but he can kind of provide you the perspective from the other end of things. So if you have questions, it's really about like landlords, why they do things a certain way, something along those lines about his platform, Furnished Finders. So you kind of get two sides of the coin here, which I'm really excited about. So things to consider. I think when you're looking at housing, there's a lot of things I just want to just upfront talk about. For example, what's your budget? Obviously, that's kind of like the one that everyone automatically thinks about. But when you're traveling, you know, you do get that non-taxable stipend a lot of the times, but you don't want to go over that. And you want to have some left over for meals and incidentals. So I think what's recommended is like one paycheck a month if you have 4 weekly paychecks. Something that I also think is really important is proximity to work. Once when I was in San Francisco, I had my assignment canceled when I showed up to the downtown hospital I was supposed to work at. And then I ended up having to commute an hour and 15 minutes to Lucille Packard's down in Palo Alto. And that commute killed me. So like know about, you know, if that's important to you, if you don't like those long drives, if you're going to be driving at rush hour because you're doing night shift, like be mindful of that and think about what that commute is going to look like and what that will do to you and your, you know, your quality of life and mental health, because no one likes those long drives.
Yeah.
As you know, it's not fun at all.
Well, keep in mind, I would imagine that, you know, there's always somebody who's done this before you, you know, so you may be taking time, but there's tons of people in the trusted community in Facebook groups that you can reach out to and go, what is the commute like during this time? And, you know, if you can't, you know, if the landlord doesn't know, there's plenty of resources that you could reach out to within the community, you know, because chances are, again, somebody's already done it.
Absolutely. And I never did an assignment in LA, but everyone always talks about the traffic. It could be 15 minutes one time of the day and an hour later in the day. So it is important. Other few ones that we want to talk about. Do they have appliances, washer, dryer, toaster, dishwasher? Is that important to you? Is it furnished? Obviously, you're going to be moving around every 13 weeks or so. You're not going to really want to deal with unfurnished apartments that you need to bring your own furniture. That would just be a logistical nightmare or really expensive. So that's something to think about. Living with others versus living alone. Do you want roommates, or are you willing to rent a room and live in a shared space? Walkability is something that was always pretty important to me. I wanted to live in an area that, like, if I got off a night shift, I could go walk around and like decompress from that shift. Proximity to gym, cafes, grocery stores. I think I already mentioned this a little bit, but I was like the research queen when I was a travel nurse, and I wanted to be next to a gym. I wanted to know that I could walk to get coffee before my shift. I already knew which grocery store I was going to go to before I showed up. And I'm sure Brian can talk more about this too, but parking can be really tricky in some cities. My assignment in San Francisco, I got a lot of parking tickets because I did not research parking beforehand and ended up being pretty expensive by the end of it. So just something to think of. Like, these are just, I really want you to take a look at these and just know kind of like what's important to you.
Yeah.
And Brian's going to talk about this a lot later on, but neighborhood safety and security, we encourage you to look up the crime stats for that area, and so you don't end up in a bad part of town.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are taking the stipend. I mean, it seems like 95% of the travel nurses take the stipend, you know, and go look for housing on their own. They want the control, and you want to know, you don't want any surprises necessarily. And there's a lot of times if you put in the legwork, you can find something under your budget and, you know, clip the rest and put that in your pocket. So it just depends. We're going to go over a ton of resources here for you guys to consider.
Absolutely. And then this is my personal favorite slide, because I don't think, I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second, Brian, I apologize. But as a woman, we are a largely female-dominated profession, and we don't always feel comfortable with negotiating. So I encourage you to get a little uncomfortable and negotiate when you're looking at housing. Everything's always negotiable. So the price, the rent, and the cancellation terms, you can get a little bit more flexibility with your cancellation terms as well if you just talk to these hosts. So from my personal perspective, this is what I did. I created a standard message when I knew I was looking for housing in the area. I drafted it up, made sure it sounded really nice. I proofread it. I made sure to mention I was a nurse because we are the most trusted profession in the U.S. People love having us as tenants, and that's important. I always want to say that I'm there for a long-term stay, a 3-month stay, and there's a possibility for extending. That just makes you a little bit more attractive as a candidate. And as you know, for the travel assignments, you might want to extend. You're not lying there. And so I would drop that up, and then I would shoot it off to a ton of properties, any properties that fit my needs, even if the cost was way out of what I could have afforded, just to see if they'd bring it down. I think once I was able to get a property to reduce by like half of what they said on Airbnb. So everything's negotiable, and I really encourage you to. And then I'll let you do those last 2 points because you actually know a little bit more about those than I do for hotels. And
yeah, so hotels, I'll do a quick plug in that on the hotel page on Furnish Finder, you will see some pretty incredible discounts. We're rolling it out. We're launching about 15,000 hotels over the next 3 to 6 months. Extended Stay America is live, and you can go and get your discount code on the Furnish Finder site on the hotels page. But extended stay hotels are great. They're great for a couple of reasons. One, maybe you want to get some boots on the ground and you really want to explore the neighborhoods and make sure you kind of get into the area that you want, that you feel safe. So hotels, we realize, are a very important part of the travel nurse journey. So we definitely lean on hotels. I mean, some travel nurses like to stay on hotels for the entire term. Some need it for a week, some need it for a month in between places. Variety of reasons why you need a hotel. But extended stays are great because they've got kitchens and it make it a little bit more like home during those longer term stays. And again, a lot of them do have reward programs and things like that you can take advantage of. One thing to always note, if you stay above 30 days, there are additional discounts where I believe the hotel can refund that short-term tax because you've stayed greater than 30 days. So always ask for those types of discounts as well. And if you're just talking to somebody at the front desk, you may not get those discounts. Just like say if you're doing your own cold calling necessarily, but say you are doing some cold calling and you're going through 4 or 5 different extended stay type hotels, ask to speak to the general manager or the manager of that hotel and tell them you're a nurse. And a lot of times they'll go, oh, okay, great. And I can absolutely get you this discount. Where if you're just talking to the front desk, they don't necessarily maybe know about travel nurse, or they don't really know about travel nurses. They just lump you into the same group as anybody else. So sometimes escalating it to the GM works.
that's great advice. That's something I didn't really know before. So that's something that, I definitely encourage everyone else to kind of put away. All right. So we're now going to talk about your housing options. We're going to go through just different types and kind of give you the pros and cons of each. So if you have any questions, like I said, please throw them in that chat function in the middle on the right-hand side. So hotels, I said dollar bills, y'all, because sometimes hotels can be pretty expensive. So that's the biggest thing that I think of when I think of hotels. I think they're great for shorter stays. There's reviews available, so you'll know if it's a good, if you're getting a good bang for your buck, if it's going to be a clean room. You're going to have more flexibility. Obviously, you can book week by week, day by day. They have cleaning available. Some have discounts for healthcare workers. And then, like Brian already mentioned, you can ask for those longer stay discounts. But like I said, they're not always set up for easy living for a travel nurse because you don't want to eat out for every single meal, right? So sometimes they don't have those kitchens or appliances that you need. Sometimes it's smaller spaces, and sometimes it just lacks that feeling of home. So they're great for those shorter stays. And, some people really like them for longer durations too. It's totally up to you. But those are just things that come to mind when I think about hotels. Brian, do you have anything to add there?
No, I mean, just for standard hotels, I think that's pretty straightforward.
And then we have corporate housing. So Also, they do have reviews available, and these are typically fully furnished apartments and condos, and they have the standard amenities. Sometimes, like they have the pools, everything else. But these are really pricey typically. If you can find these just by searching corporate housing Phoenix, for example, and you'll see that they're typically priced way above what you would pay probably at other places on other platforms. There's not as much room for negotiation with these, I found, and you would need to chat about the cancellation policies because they're not always as flexible either.
Yeah, these are typically under lease, Casey, and so they're pretty strict, and they are more expensive. I mean, think of a company coming in, they're securing maybe a master lease in an agreement or in a apartment complex, and they're going to manage that agreement, and then they're going to chop it up into different stays. And you say, okay, I need it for 3 months. They're going to go, okay, well, here's the price plus furniture plus our fee. There's just a lot of add-ons when it comes to corporate housing. Travel nurses and corporate housing, they don't really mix just because you're priced out. C-suite execs, travel IT techs, maybe. But for maybe you get lucky, and sometimes you got to do what you have to do if you're in an impacted area. But for the most part, corporate housing can be pretty expensive. Stipend killer.
Absolutely. All right, and extended stays. So I stayed in an extended stay once in one assignment just for a short period of time. It was pretty good. I know I always see for other nurses, a lot of nurses really like extended stays. So I think this is a good option. Like I said, they have the reviews available. There's lots of locations all across the U.S. for these. They do sometimes negotiate discounts for healthcare workers and longer stays, and they typically have that kitchen that you need. It goes back to what I said before. It's really what you need and what's important to you. Sometimes they don't always have that homey feeling as if you were renting a little house or apartment. But if that's not important to you and you're only there for 13 weeks, that's fine. And sometimes I've heard a little bit, they vary a little bit in quality and cleanliness. So you want to do your research before you go somewhere.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I visited quite a few extended stays, and they have pumped in a bunch of money, have some brand new properties, all in the US. So, we all kind of know extended stays. But I was really impressed with some of the ones that I've seen recently.
Yeah, I've stayed in some really nice ones. One of my friends actually used to work for Hilton, so I used to get the friends and family discount, and I stayed some of their, the ones that are associated with them, just driving to and from. Wow, I could definitely, it was like a full-blown apartment, some of them.
Yeah.
It's really nice. All right. And then good old Craigslist. So I put up in here hit or miss. Obviously, this is going to be something where you can find rooms or houses for rent by owner. The biggest plus to Craigslist is that you're renting directly from the owner, in my opinion. So sometimes you can negotiate lower deals. It's a little bit more flexible. Sometimes these are people, though, that might not have a lot of experience in being a landlord. So that's just something to think about, on the flip side. You can also place your own ad for housing, under the wanted section. And like I said, you can negotiate. But the biggest thing with Craigslist, I think that is the scariest, is there's a lot of scams on there. Some are really easy to spot, while others can be a little bit more eloquently worded or look a little bit more real. So that's something to take into consideration for sure. There's nothing to protect you there if you get scammed, is the biggest thing. And you have to be careful with the leases. And I think that I keep talking about reviews, but I'm a big review queen. And when there's no reviews for a place, you might walk in there and find something that's a little bit sketchy. So just take that in consideration.
Yeah. It's known for bait and switch. It's known for online housing scams. It's difficult. Now, you can absolutely, there's a lot of people that use Craigslist. And if you're a new traveler, I would recommend maybe sticking to Furnish Finder or some other sites that do a lot of the vetting for you. But if you're the housing queen, as you say, then you will probably be able to get a crash course in online housing scams. You're going to be able to recognize them and just ghost them and go, that's a scam, and move on. And you'll be able to really recognize, legitimate properties. It's just frustrating, because you burn a lot of energy, you run into a lot of dead ends. Um, but again, you can get lucky. You can find the greatest place with the greatest landlord in the world there. There's just a lot that you need to that you need to know and protect yourself. We're going to go into a little bit, but just I would say for the new travel nurses coming into this industry, steer clear. You will get a crash course, and it breaks my heart when the crash course is you getting scammed. Um, Granted, it'll never happen to you again, but it's a hard lesson to learn. And everybody knows that that Craigslist is kind of one of the larger offenders.
Absolutely. And you brought up a good point too, especially if you're looking for housing in a crunch, like Craigslist might not be your place, even if you are experienced, just because you have to wade through so many scams and sort the ones that are, quality housing or not. So that was a great point. All right. So Facebook housing groups. There are a lot of large online communities for travel nurse housing. I listed a few there, and Furnished actually has one as well. The biggest thing that I like about these Facebook housing groups are that they're typically targeted towards travel nurses and landlords that are familiar with renting to travel nurses. You can find other travel nurses who can vouch for them. So they can tell you like the pros and cons, any place that you find on there a lot of the times. And they like renting to nurses, and they're just a little bit more flexible, I think, in my mind, in working with you, or what I've seen and have been able to find on these Facebook housing groups. And like I said, as I'm going to say every single time, it's negotiable. So you can definitely bring those prices down. I'm going to let you talk about the negatives here, because I think you've seen this a little bit more than I have in recent times.
Yeah, Casey, I have to say my mom would be really proud that everything is negotiable. She instilled that in me a long time ago, and my wife always cracks up because I'll even come back with, like, how did you get a discount at that store? Well, like, places you wouldn't even anticipate being able to get a discount, and it never hurts to ask, right?
Right. That's such a good point. And that's what I try to tell people. And that's why I keep saying it, because if the one thing you take away is that you can always ask. The worst thing they're going to say is no, right?
Yeah,
like,
I love it. So, like Casey mentioned, Furnish Finder does have a Facebook group. It's got about 65,000 members in it. And the best thing about Facebook groups is community. I mean, on the downside, sometimes we have moderators full time that kind of moderate the conversation, but sometimes they can get fairly heated. It is not anonymous, so whatever you type, your recruiter can see, your friends can see, your boss can see, your coworkers can see, if they're members. So don't feel like that it's a private group, even though they call it a private group. Just be aware of that. And when it comes to another really good thing, kind of like Craigslist, like you said, is that you can go direct to the landlord. And that's the way it is on furnishfinder.com as well. You go direct to the landlord. But that's one of the greatest things about the Facebook groups, is that you're communicating with the landlord ahead of time. And one of the downsides is that, again, online housing scams. These guys are terrible, and they're preying on travel nurses, and it's sickening, and it happens. We're going to provide you guys with a lot of resources at the end. Feel free to read through and really educate. If you do one thing and you're starting out, educate yourself on how to spot and how to identify and how to protect yourself from online housing scams. We're going to go into that, but Facebook groups are not immune to housing scammers. They'll use the private messaging, Facebook Messenger function, and they'll say, "Hey, how's it going? I've got a place," and da da da. And they even may say, "Hey, I've got a place on Furnish Finder," but make sure you get the URL and make sure they actually do have a listing on Furnish Finder. Because one of the things about Furnish Finder is that every listing on there has been, every landlord that puts a listing on there has been authenticated. So, I'll go into it a little bit later, but just know that it's, a very, very safe place to find housing. And again, Facebook, the Facebook groups, you could get some bait and switch. Here, there's some pictures, but they're not the same place, or, it looks furnished, but it's partially furnished, or you think it's a private place, but it might be a room in a shared environment. So those are the types of things that here are difficult to control. But overall, Facebook groups are useful. I would encourage you to join a few, start interacting, and make some friends and ask some questions.
Absolutely. And that's a good place to even ask, like, just ask general questions too about like what are landlords looking for, things along those lines. I've seen that a lot in those groups as well.
Yep.
All right. And so then we have our vacation rental website. So that's like our Airbnb, our VRBO, HomeAway. Obviously, a lot of you are probably already familiar with these sites. The biggest thing that I want to say from these is that you do get some support from the platforms, which is nice. The search tools are usually a little bit better to work with than, say, on like Craigslist or like going through the Facebook groups. It's a little bit easier to filter through housing options. The biggest thing I think is that typically these are a little bit, they're typically priced, I guess, for shorter stays. And so sometimes it might be a little bit out of budget. But like I said before, you still should look on these websites and just message the host and see what they're willing to lower the price to if you're doing a longer term stay. And then also you'll want to confirm the cancellation policies. I think, people have already brought it up, but if you get canceled on contract, say like I did, you want to know if they're going to be willing to refund you or not from the get-go, like what that looks like. And then sometimes the sites also will tack on these extra fees and you're like, what? Like now it's like $500 extra. So like, just be aware of those.
Yeah, it's, I love Airbnb and VRBO. We use it personally for vacations and such. And yeah, you go through and you look at it and you're going, okay, that's a decent price. And then you click book and then all those other fees come in. You're going, wait, how did it just jump up $2,000? So yeah, just be aware of all those kind of extra fees. One thing about Furnished Finder is that there are no fees for travel nurses. But these are wonderful sites. They've spent millions and millions of dollars on making it very easy to find housing. The filters are amazing. The pictures are beautiful. These are they're great sites. So I would encourage you to check them every time. But with a caveat of saying, if you're going to try to get out and try to save some of the money for the booking fees, a lot of times you'll find a same or similar property on Furnish Finder without those booking fees. So definitely use those sites. I use them personally as well, but if you're trying to get around those booking fees that can add up, you may want to look, for a different site.
Absolutely. And just for the questions I see. So Tamiko, I think we might cover that in a little bit. So I'll wait just a little bit before I ask Brian to answer that for you. And then for Sarah, I'd love to send y'all that message. So we'll do a follow-up email and I'll find out what I used to send and kind of draft a little bit more generic response. And I'll send that to you guys in the follow-up email for sure with the recording. And then let's see. So I think this is you. We're going to cover Furnish Finders.
Okay, perfect. So furnishedfinder.com, you can head over there. You head over there for a couple of reasons. Number one, you need housing right now. You need housing within the next couple of weeks, need housing within the next month or so. So you can go in, you can type in your city and state. We've got about 70,000 properties on our map at all times for travel nurses to choose from. And keep in mind, when we're attracting landlords are looking for you. They're looking for your type of a tenant that stays, for 1 month or greater, that they're traveling professionals, they're employees, they're background checked. So this is you are the ideal tenant for our type of landlord. They're looking for you. So that's why a lot of times when you go on to furnishedfinder.com, every time you can have you have direct access to the landlords. So you can use our system. You can go outside of our system. However you want to connect with that landlord, you can do that. You can get those questions answered ahead of time. And like Casey says, you can start to negotiate, which is very important. And the second reason you want to come to our site is to really kind of, maybe you're shopping a couple different jobs. you're untrusted, you're looking at Nashville, you're looking at a small town in California, you're looking at Austin, and you're going to go, okay, where can I get the most bang for the buck, right? Where can I make my stipend go the furthest? Come to our site and you can look in those different areas. You can get an idea of the lay of the land in terms of how much is a typical room, how much is a typical private unit, private unit with pets, things like that. Whatever is important to you, it's really important before you accept that position in San Francisco, right, Casey? If you're thinking that you can move from Alabama and go to San Francisco and have similar housing costs, it's quite the opposite. It'll be an amazing shock to you in terms of the price. So before you accept that job, head over to Furnish Finder and take a look. And then we can head to the next slide if you would like. Or I can talk about the map more if you like. Okay, here we go.
I think I switched.
All right, so this is a housing request feature, and similar to what we had talked about earlier, I think on Craigslist you had mentioned that you can put up an ad and then let some of the landlords reach out to you. This is kind of that feature, a little bit better, in that you're able to put in a housing request and then you dial it down into some of the things that are important to you. So you fill out this form, you're able to create this radius, and then landlords with availability can reach out to you directly and then say, hey, I've got a place here, this is what I have, here's my Furnish Finder link, and you can take a look and take it from there. So these housing requests are very useful. A lot of recruiters use these housing requests as well. It's easy. Maybe you're on an assignment now, you're at work, you're thinking about your next place, but you're not really, you don't have time at work, obviously, to start digging in and making phone calls to landlords. This is a form that takes, a minute or two, and it can help start that process for you. And like I said, a lot of recruiters use it as well, so they can provide housing requests or housing options to their travelers. The city research tool is a pretty cool tool. It would go in that latter category that I was discussing earlier. When you're in research mode, you need to understand a city. You're comparing a couple different cities, trying to figure out how far that stipend is going to get you. This city research tool is a pretty good resource for you. It's on the homepage of furnishfinder.com. Scroll down a couple sections and it'll be right there. You put in your city and state, and it'll tell you kind of all the information that you need to know. It'll give you kind of a overview of that particular city. So that's a really good tool that we would recommend as well. Of course, resource page, you can submit that housing request. This is where you'll find that avoid scams. I know we're going to dig into this, but there's an article right there. It's the second one down. Avoid scams. And so this is what we'll reference once we start avoiding or discussing that. We do have a property verification program. We know that we're not the only site out there. And like I said, our hearts break when we hear about a travel nurse getting scammed on Craigslist or Zillow, or probably the two biggest offenders. But it can happen anywhere. So you really have to, protect yourself. So when maybe you find a place on Craigslist or Zillow, you're not quite sure, like maybe the guy's a little aggressive, he really wants that deposit from you, you're not quite sure, maybe your spidey senses are going off a little bit. Learn to trust those instincts, because most of the time those instincts are right. But we'll be here as a resource. Whether you find housing on Furnish Finder or not, what you can do is you can reach out to us. I think it's on the next slide, but it's quality@furnishfinder.com, and you could let us know, hey, I found a guy, maybe not this slide, but I found a guy, here's his information, can you check him out? And we'll absolutely do that for you for free as a resource, and we'll run them through our program. So if they don't reply, then it's, you might have your answer. Or if we get some negative information, we can share that with you and say, hey, that doesn't quite look right. You may want to move on to the next one. So that's a good resource for you. We have an app literally in like 24 hours. The iOS app will roll live on a brand new app that we've been working on. And so that will be a really good resource for you as well, to search for housing and contact property owners from your mobile phone. Android is already live, but it's there. So go ahead and take a look in the App Store for the Furnished Finder app. And those are kind of the main resources that we'd like to recommend at this point. And if we move on, okay. Oh, what's the difference? So this is my pitch about Furnished Finder. So Furnished Finder is a safe platform for travel nurses to come and find monthly furnished housing. I emphasize the safe part, and this is important, in that every landlord has been authenticated. And I'll say it again, every landlord on Furnished Finder has been authenticated. And that's important because we know how prevalent online scams are and how devastating it can be, where you save up that money to go on your first or second, or it doesn't matter what assignment you're on. If it happens, it's a killer. It crushes you. It crushes your spirit, and it takes away obviously that hard-earned money. It can really set you back. So every landlord on Furnished Finder is authenticated. And it's not just the property saying, yep, that's the right, that owner is the owner of that property. We actually go the extra step and authenticate that person with out of wallet questions from their credit report, questions like, what car did you drive, in 2016, what mortgage do you have? Things like this that only you as a person will know. So landlords are authenticated on Furnished Finder. Okay, enough on safety. Let's talk finances. There are no markups on Furnished Finder, to speak specifically about corporate housing. There's no markups or extra commissions that you pay. There are no booking fees, to speak to the vacation rental model. You have direct access to the landlord, and you're going to find properties are a little bit lower on our site. And that's because there are no markups. It's like going direct. Whatever the landlord says the rent is, that's what's listed on our site. So if you say, hey, your site is too expensive, well, that's the landlord listing. That's the market. There are no additional fees. In fact, we don't take anything from the traveler ever. So that's part of my pitch on why Furnished Finder is different than maybe a vacation rental platform or a corporate housing platform.
For sharing that. So there's a couple questions here that I just want to address really quick. So Tamika asked this earlier, and I'm not sure what your policy or how y'all settle disputes between landlords and tenants, but asked, before I forget, I've heard many horror stories of people using other agencies for housing and either contracts getting canceled and hosts aren't willing to return the deposit. How will your company work with the host to get our deposit back when housing isn't up to standard, advertisements incorrect, host creepy, unsafe, host or guest not accommodating?
Well, we verify the landlords themselves that they are real people to prevent online housing fraud. When you book housing on Furnished Finder, you're booking with that landlord directly. And this is where the negotiation comes in. And we have a couple questions at the end that you're going to really want to take note of, because in order to eliminate those types of surprises, you need to be upfront and really dig in. Monthly housing typically involves a lease. So you really need to know what's in that lease and ask the landlord the questions about what happens if my assignment gets canceled early, and we'll go in all those questions. But when you're booking on Furnish Finder, you're booking direct with those landlords. So, we don't get involved in the booking as a middleman.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And then Sarah asked, I know nurses are one of the most stressful professions, but I worry a little bit about telling them I'm a travel nurse, as I wonder if prices go up for me because I know that we're paid well. Has this been the case for others? That's a really great question. So thank you for asking. I've never had that experience. If anything, they're like, oh, you're a nurse. Like, thank you. I used to tell them like, oh yeah, I'm a pediatric nurse. I work at I work with sick children at the hospital, and they're like, oh, thank you. Bless you. Yes, we'll negotiate a lower price. But with obviously what travel nurses are making is more in the news now. So I haven't personally heard of that happening, but if anyone wants to throw in the chat and share that they've heard that or experienced that, then obviously please do. So, but great question, Sarah. All right. And then up next, we're going to talk about online housing scams.
Yeah. Do you want me to dig into this one?
Yeah, I feel like you know these red flags just as well as I do, but I'll let you start and I can share my 2 cents.
Yeah, please. Yeah, so you're going to notice that these guys, they really go to amazing lengths to try to appear legitimate. Expect them to have a fake ID or a passport that they can send you. They'll be able to forge utility bills. So yeah, be very, very aware, and they to the lengths that they take to appear legitimate. The telltale sign is when maybe an average place in that particular city is somewhere around 15 to 2,000, and you see a beautiful place for 1,200. The pictures are going to be beautiful, really professional images with prices that are a little under market. They do this for a few reasons. One is to create action, and the second is to create emotion. Like, oh gosh, like this is a good deal. I better hurry up and get on this before somebody else does. And they're counting on that thought process. A lot of this is very, very mental. So yeah, just be aware. Those are kind of some of the red flags that you should be aware of. We talked about Craigslist, Zillow, Facebook groups. Where do they make their money? Is they make their money when you send a deposit, and then they're going to say, oh well, would you like to make another I'll give you half off rent if you pay me up front, or they'll come up with all these types of things because they know once you arrive or shortly on the lead up, you're going to realize it's a scam, and then it's over. So they're basically going to be trying to collect your move-in costs and your deposit, and they're going to be going after it aggressively. A lot of times they could blend in pretty well. That's what they do for a living. They're con artists, right? So keep an eye out for frequent misspellings. A lot of times they'll use the British spelling of things as opposed to kind of the US spelling of words. Or yeah, just the odd wording or more misspellings. Maybe they'll reach out to you in the middle of the night. Like, why is this guy reaching out to me? He only contacts me between 11 and 4 a.m. Why is that? So, and also they prefer to move money through Zelle or Cash App. They do this because you have no recourse. It's like a wire. Once the button's pushed, it's gone. You have no recourse. So online rent payments are very easy. If you can pay rent or the deposit with a credit card, not only do you get the float and the points, but you do have recourse when you pay rent or your moving costs through a credit card as well.
That's a great point. I just want to share, I think the biggest thing to understand, if it's if it seems like it's too good to be true, it probably is. And I just want to reinforce that sometimes they're really, really good at making it seem like a real listing. I mean, they have all the photos of the house. I remember when this was even before I was a travel nurse. I was looking for a place. I used to work at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and I was trying to find a place for me and my friends to live. And I remember seeing this beautiful house. I drove by the house and the house was in the right location, right address, all the pictures were accurate and all of that. And then I realized that he wouldn't like speak to me on the phone about the house. He wouldn't do a walkthrough or anything of that. And that set off a red flag. And it ended up being a scam because I knocked on the door and they were like, no, we live here full time. So that was my first introduction to scams way before actually travel nursing, but they do a really good job at conning people.
Yeah, unfortunately they do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So for avoiding housing scams, here are a few things you should do. Like you said, have recourse. Consider paying moving costs with a credit card. Obviously, you can contest that. Ask for a walkthrough. Live or FaceTime is great. Obviously, if you're already there on the grounds, doing a live walkthrough is great because you can take a look at everything, make sure it's up to snuff, and that you feel comfortable with the location and all of that. FaceTime is really great as well. Use your instincts. When in doubt, ghost them. I absolutely agree with this. Like if you're just something feels off, it's never worth like the thousands of dollars that you can lose in a scam. Like just walk away from it.
Yeah.
And then Brian, you do that last one.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, don't chase it. Use your instincts. You're probably right. Just give yourself some credit. You're probably right. If something seems off, it probably is. All right. There's a ton of housing out there. Don't get emotional about that one house because it's priced so well and you're trying to hurry up and get it. Don't fall into that trap. Take a cool and calm approach to it. And again, quality@furnishedfinder.com. That's the email I was referencing earlier. Reach out to us if we can help. If you think you're talking to a scammer, reach out and provide us the information and we'll get back as much information as we can to you. So hopefully that's a valuable resource to you.
Absolutely. And then safety considerations. Let's see. So safety on the road. We already kind of talked about this a little bit, but as a single female traveling around, I definitely this is always top of mind. You want to look up the neighborhood crime stats, see what, we don't want to end up in a bad part of town. I had a friend who ended up in the Tenderloin in San Francisco because she didn't quite look. And then, so she quickly wanted to move out of that area. So just always kind of do your research before you go. Emergency card kit is always fantastic to have on hand. Always keep the door locked, security system on. Hide that laptop. I'll say a little bit about that. When I was in San Francisco as well, I had a lot of friends have their cars broken into, especially in my neighborhood. I think someone was going around my neighborhood specifically and breaking into cars. And so even like small things out and about where people can see it, I would really try to hide those, put everything in that kind of like your middle dash and just make sure nothing's in sight. Absolutely. Because that just encourages people obviously to break in.
Yeah. Yeah, and keep, we said always keep your door locked. We mean always, truly. Like everybody thinks, okay, lock your door before you leave, go to work, right? But especially when you're home, lock the door. You don't know the area. You're just getting there. Lock the door. Be safe.
Yeah. And then I can let you finish this few.
You could say hey to your neighbors. That way they can kind of they know who you are. They can know a little bit about your routine. They can keep an eye on things for you. Definitely reach out to your friends. Try to connect with other people. You can, I know within the trusted community, I think you could do that. Facebook groups again. Hey, who's in Nashville? Who's in Austin? Let's hook up. Make friends with the folks at your work. And, if there's any type of personal protection that might be a martial art that or you're practicing, just the basics at least, or it could be some sort of non-lethal spray that is that you carry if it's legal. Do that. Casey, you mentioned going on runs after your shift. I mean, that's great, but again, you do have to. Did you bring anything? When you go on those runs, Casey, what do you do to kind of protect yourself?
I was always pretty careful depending on where I was at. Like I would, if I was in a safe neighborhood, I would absolutely do that. If it was somewhere that was a little bit more cautious, I would find a local gym that I felt more comfortable with to work out. So really kind of like it depends on, it's a case by case situation, but Something I do want to call out, there's these great keychains now from She Birdie. And I promise I'm not a sponsor of them, but I just think they're really great. They're crafted for women. Because even with mace, for me specifically, I feel like if something was happening, I'd be so worried I'd, spray myself in the face rather than the person assaulting me. So there are these car chains, not car chains, keychains that emit like a jet engine loud noise, and it's just very startling, and it's shown to proven to like reduce the incidence of someone assaulting someone. So I think it's just a really great tool to have on, and that's just a keychain. So I definitely suggest looking into that. I think they're only about $25.
That's pretty cool. One thing my wife always says is, getting in and out of your car. She always says, guys, don't even think about this, but she always has her keys in her hand before she checks out or wherever she's going. Say you're going through the double doors, right? Have your keys in your hand so you're not looking down or for the keys, where you're not being able to look around you. So she always says, have your keys in your hand before you approach the vehicle. That way you can have your head on a swivel and look around to make sure, because I know that that's a dangerous time, I guess. I think there's been studies or people have seen that attacks can occur right before you get into the car because they know your head is down. And again, cell phones, just be aware. Instead of walking with a cell phone, just be aware of your surroundings. Yeah, you guys probably already know all this stuff, but
yeah, that's always good to just reinforce it.
It's a good reminder.
Absolutely. So we only have about 7 minutes left, so we can kind of go through this quickly at the end. Brian, just give a few more minutes for questions. So we're talking about securing a rental. I'll let you take it from here, Brian.
Okay. Yeah, these are the questions. I mean, I don't need to spend too much time on them, but you should have these questions easily accessible when you start the leasing process. Obviously, you need to ask these questions to minimize the surprises later on. If you get an answer that you don't like, well, now, before you sign the lease, this is the perfect time to find out. But later on, once you're in the lease and then something comes out, that's the time where it's really too late. So you have to do your due diligence ahead of time, and that window is shrinking. So make sure you take advantage of that due diligence window before you sign the lease. How long is my lease term? Sometimes is it monthly? Is it a 3-month minimum? So that's definitely something to be aware of. What should I expect if my assignment gets canceled? This is the negotiation part. This is the part where, even if it's on the lease and it's in black and white, I'm not comfortable with that 30 days. I'm not comfortable paying the entire term if my assignment gets canceled halfway through. Can you amend the lease? And many times they will. Sometimes they won't. If it's apartment complex, they may not, or corporate housing, they may not. But at least and you can make that decision ahead of time. What are all of the move-in costs? And then you can ask them again, is there anything else I should know about? Definitely know every move-in cost so there are no surprises. Are all of the utilities included in the rent? Again, no surprises. I don't want to be paying for, snow removal during the winter or trash or some, weird, obscure type of HOA fee. I don't know what they would do, but just make sure everything is included in the rent. Sometimes I have heard where they go, okay, yes, everything's included in the rent. However, if you run the AC, too long, then there's a fee or something. I don't know how they keep track of that. But again, these are all of the things that you need to know about before you enter into the lease. Is the security deposit refundable is a very big question, and you need to know the answer, and you need to know the reasons why they would keep some of your money. And don't be afraid to ask specifically, what are those reasons? It's refundable, but in what circumstances would you not refund me 100%? And they'll tell you. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. How much notice do you require before vacating? This is important. Again, it's Casey mentioned about renewing, right? And it seemed like our research was about a third of the time you guys like to renew. You like your contract, you like where you're staying. Well, let's renew for another 3 months, right? So, but how much notice do you need as a landlord before vacating? Um, and if it's 60 days, sometimes you may not know that. If it's 30 days, I mean, and you may also want to negotiate and say, look, I may not know until 2 weeks. Is 2 weeks okay? If they say 30 days, you may want to ask for 2 weeks. Again, it's all negotiable. Take the time, do your due diligence now. Let's see, when is rent due and how can I pay? Can you pay by credit card? Is it due on the first? Are there late fees? Is there a grace period? If it's due on the first, but can I pay it on the third without any penalty? Do you prorate rent if I move into the middle of the month? Okay, it's the 15th. Rent is 1,500. Am I going to have to pay 1,500 to move in, and then the lease starts the 15th to the 15th, or do you prorate the rent where you're charging 750 for that half month, and then I pay 1,500 on the first going forward? And then what is the policy regarding visitors? We've seen in the Facebook groups where some landlords will say no visitors, or any visitor needs to be approved or something like that. They could have some weird policies. So know what you're getting into. Ask these questions. There's probably more, so feel free to share them in the chat, and so everybody else listening can learn as well.
Miko brought up, so she, I don't know if everyone remembered earlier, Sarah asked about whether telling them you were a nurse was a bad idea. I personally still don't think it's a bad idea, but Tamiko said she has seen that landlords are sometimes price gouging in the nursing groups because they see how much nurses are making right now, especially with the pandemic. I guess my 2 cents would be that if a landlord's willing to price gouge a nurse who's taking assignment to work during a global pandemic, maybe that's not someone I would want to be my landlord. Because there's quality people out there who are great landlords, and I don't think a quality person would do that to a nurse personally. But Brian, you might have a different opinion about that.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen. People are people, right? We have an education campaign where we educate our landlords when they're coming in, that they're saying, look, these are not cash cows. Okay, don't look to them as travelers with lavish stipends, that they're coming in looking for modern masterpieces or beachfront rentals. It's not the case. Their budgets are very, very affordable. Okay, and that's the type of housing they need. They need clean, they need safe, and you need affordable housing. So we do the best that we can to educate them before, if they're coming on thinking that, hey, we can go ahead and really gouge a lot of nurses or get a higher price point. We let them know out of the gate it's not the case. So I think a lot of that, but keep in mind, they still have to compete in the market. Okay, well, they may have the idea, hey, I can make more money, but ultimately, a smart travel nurse is going to go, why would I pay, over market for your place when I've got 4 or 5 or 6 on Furnish Finder that are just as good, and so ultimately they're going to sit vacant and lose money when you choose another property that's appropriately priced.
Absolutely. I really quick, I had a place that I paid probably a little too much for. And I didn't do as much research as I normally did. And I got a little funny feeling from their landlord, and he wouldn't bring down the price and all of that. And at the end of it, I think I told you this when we were doing a run through, Brian, there was like a little bit of a pin mark on the inside of one of the washers or dryers from leaving a pin in my scrubs. And he charged me for a whole new washer and dryer out of my security deposit. That was when I was a travel nurse too. So look at these signs, pay attention. If they're doing that, then you probably don't want to rent from them. All right, we're going to answer this one question, and I think we actually ran out of time, guys. Sorry we talked so much, but I enjoyed this. All right. So this may be a novice question, but in regards to paying via credit card, what if the landlord does not have an online portal, a realtor? What if I don't hold checks? Do people still take money orders? You might be able to answer this a little bit better than me.
Yeah, I mean, instead of a money order type of a scenario, it might be a situation where you educate the landlord a little bit and say, hey, if you don't have the opportunity to accept online rent payment with a credit card, there are plenty of sites where you can do that online. You know, as Furnish Finder, we recommend a company called KeyCheck, where you could do your online rent payment, and landlords have other tools that they can use there. But yeah, so there may be some education needed from your end. So you're kind of advocating for yourself to accept credit cards. And so you educate them a little bit, say, hey, why don't you go on a KeyCheck, set up an account, and then that way I can use my credit card.
Okay, awesome.